So guys, our next speaker is a lawyer, a published author, and an expert on the topic of professional baseball in Latin America. He has been at the forefront of generating awareness in the United States, Canada, and Latin America about the problems in Latin American countries caused by professional baseball. He is currently a columnist with ESPN Deportes. Let's welcome Arturo Marcano. And guys, interviewing Arturo will be Morgan Campbell, who is making his second pitch appearance, and is a business reporter with a focus on business of sports for the Toronto Star. Everyone, Morgan Campbell, give him a big round of applause.
Arturo, ¿por qué no empezamos con lo que está pasando en Venezuela? We do this in English. But just by way of introducing Arturo a little bit more, because like as much as you introduce the guy, and I give him a hard time, he's always deflecting it. He's very humble. But really, you know, when he comes to the press box at Rogers Center, like he's trust me, he's slumming it. Okay, like has a law degree. A sports management degree from UMass Amherst, and he's hanging out with people like us who, you know, stand around in locker rooms like for a living. He could be doing something else, and he hangs around us. Like, and there's out of everyone in this room, out of all the baseball brain power in this room, there's only one person in here who can call Rob Manfred on the bat phone and get Rob Manfred to call back, and it's him. And this is one of the reasons, you know, I talked to Kevin and said, hey, man, we got to get Arturo on here because there's a lot of knowledge here, you know, in Toronto. You know, and a lot of us don't recognize that he's here because he writes for ESPN Deportes, and we assume he's in Miami, but he's here in Toronto. So what we have, I think we have a PowerPoint presentation. Now, Arturo, did you want to go through the PowerPoint first and explain? Because what Arturo... we're going to talk about, or what I'm going to interview. I'm going to play Ron McClain to his Don Cherry, except I'm better looking than McClain and he's smarter than Don Cherry, but we're going to, you know, I'm going to set him up to talk about, you know, what we in North America call the winter leagues, but as he points out to us, it's not really winter down there.
Yes, yeah, well, thank you so much for coming. There were many things that we can talk about, especially in baseball in Latin America. We can talk about trafficking Cuban players or buscones or what is really the concept of baseball academies in Latin America. Not the one that MLB wants to tell you, but the reality. But I decided to talk about winter ball. That we don't have winter in the Caribbean, and these leagues are known locally as Caribbean leagues and Caribbean ball. And there is the Caribbean series, that is where each of the champion face each other. So, and I decided to talk about this because there is a specific and special connection between a Venezuelan winter ball team and the Toronto Blue Jays. And this is something that not a lot of people know here. But where I grew up, we thought like everybody in Toronto will know about Cardenales de Lara. And you have no idea how many Toronto Blue Jays fans are in this city in the middle of Venezuela. And it's sad because I got that impression when I came here, and then it was tough to realize that that was not the case, like the people here wouldn't recognize that connection. But let's talk about winter ball. And these are leagues. The current leagues are Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and Mexico. These are all leagues. Like Puerto Rico was created in 1938, Venezuela in 1945, the Dominican Republic in 1951, and Mexico in 1957. But there were previous leagues than this. Like one of the teams that participated in the winter ball in Venezuela was created in 1917. And the Tiburones de la Guaira, that is this shirt, has a 50 years of history. So there's a long history of baseball in Latin America and professional baseball in Latin America. And there were an initial phase. Those 4 teams are the ones that create the Confederation, the Caribbean Confederation. The original 4 teams were Cuba, Puerto Rico, Panama, and Venezuela. And that lasted from 1949 to 1960 because Fidel Castro eliminated professional baseball in Cuba, so the Caribbean Series disappeared for 10 years after that. But Panama was a great baseball country for many years. But the teams that dominated that first phase of the Caribbean Series was Puerto Rico and Cuba. Especially Cuba was a superpower in those years. And I just want to, the next one. These are just basic information about what is the Venezuelan Baseball League. It's impossible to talk about the history of this group of leagues. Like, it will take forever. So I just decided to talk about the Venezuelan Baseball League because it's the one that I grew up with. And the reason why I fell in love with baseball. And it was founded in 1945. There were 4 teams in those years. Right now we have 8 teams. There is like the regular season is played at the beginning of, it starts at the beginning of October and ends at the end of December. Then there is the playoff in January, and then the final also in January, and then the winner will go to the Caribbean Series. And the last year, Cuba was invited back to the Caribbean Series for the first time since 1960. And probably it was because of this now relationship between Cuba and Venezuela, and that allowed that to happen. But they didn't do very well, by the way. Well, to talk about the quality of winter ball, I think there are two main factors that can explain that. And especially in the early years, and that will go from the early years until mid-'80s, probably end of the '80s. One was race. We got to see a lot of African American players that were not allowed to play in the big leagues. They needed an additional income. They were welcome in Mexico, they were welcome in the Caribbean, and we were so lucky. And they really helped to consolidate these leagues. And the second factor will be...
Well, Arturo, before you go on, because African American players, but name some of the great Negro League players that wound up playing in Venezuela, just so that people can really picture the quality of play we're talking about.
Yeah, we can put the next slide if you want. And you can go over this. These are some of the players that played during the early years and some of recent years in the Venezuelan winter ball. And they all belong right now to the Hall of Fame. And again, the quality of these are like the unknown leagues, professional leagues, because and partly is because these leagues have done a horrible job of promoting themselves and trying to explain the world what they are and the history of this league. But as you see in that list, like you got to see the best players on earth during those years, and it was they are only not the African American players. There were many African American or many Latinos who were black who couldn't play in the big leagues, but there were great players. Like Venezuela won what it was known like the World Cup of Baseball in 1941. Many of those players were never never make it to the majors because they were basically black. But they play amazing baseball. And that's what my dad and my granddad saw in these leagues, especially at the early years. And the second factor was money. Remember that the free agency right was gained in 1976, but salaries in the majors, in the big leagues, were not really high until late 80s. So even in the 70s, the 60s, the 70s, and early 80s, many of the big leaguers were gaining more money playing winter ball than in the big leagues, just for playing 3 months of baseball. I talked with Buck Martinez recently. I say 1 year I won like $10,000 for Kansas City, and I was gaining $4,000 per month playing for Tiburones. So that year I made more money in Venezuela than in the big league. But that was probably the case of many of these players who saw winter ball as also an opportunity to get more money. Don Baylor, when he was an established star and he was invited to play baseball in Venezuela, and they asked him, "Why are you playing baseball if you are like a big star already in the big leagues?" And he said, "Well, I need to pay my mortgage." And that's probably the same case with a lot of these players who went and played in Venezuela. So, but maybe we can go through some of the pictures that I have. This has nothing to do with Venezuela, but this is Cangrejero de Santurce, who sent the Caribbean. This was the champion in Puerto Rico, and they sent this team to Venezuela to play in the Caribbean Series. And 2 of the 3 outfielders were Roberto Clemente and Willie Mays, and of course they won. This is Pete Rose, and Pete Rose played in Venezuela in 1964. He was the Rookie of the Year in the National League in 1963. So it was the year after he was the Rookie of the Year. He had an amazing season with Caracas, Leones del Caracas, one of probably the most important, with more tradition, teams in Venezuela. Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds went to play in Venezuela. He was a prospect. But he also had an amazing season, and he was released. And he was released not because he was not doing well, but because the general manager felt that he was not going to do well under pressure. They were almost ready to go to the playoff, and this young guy who was good, but so they decided, no, we should release this guy. So, okay, Ryan Sandberg. We can go some over it really fast. Greg Maddox. Dave Parker. This is in 1982. Parker was already a major star. He had like 10 years in the big leagues. And his case is sad because he won the batting title the first time he went to Venezuela. He hit 400. The second time, though, was the cocaine years in the big leagues. That was a big problem in the big leagues. And of course, Caribbean leagues are a reflection of the big leagues. So if you have a problem in the big leagues, you also have it in the Caribbean leagues. So later we realized that one of the reasons why he loved to play in Venezuela was something not related to baseball. Yes, Orozco, I just put that picture because I think that the glove is illegal. Or I heard Chaser, just to put some of you. Ron Underhire were like 150 pounds less than he's right now. Okay, now, this is Cardenales de Lara. Really, like when I grew up in Venezuela, like you go to Barquisimeto. Barquisimeto is a city, small city. My mom was born there. When you went to Barquisimeto in the 80s, 90% of people in Barquisimeto were Blue Jays fans. Really, like, and I'm not kidding, I'm not lying. And especially because, we can go to the next slide, because when you were watching your stars right here, These players who play for the Blue Jays, we were also watching the same players in Venezuela in winter ball, the same one, the same years. And some of these players were there when they were prospect, like Roy Halladay, like recently John Green. But in those years, and we can go, we saw Willie Upshaw, Jesse Barfield's son was born in Venezuela, John Barfield. And he's in the Venezuelan, like there is a list in Venezuela who have played in the big leagues, and John Barfield is one of them. I don't know, Gino Petrali, who play here. Okay, let me see what's this. Okay, this is the last part, and then we can start talking. Things have changed. Salaries in the big leagues are extremely high. Now signing bonus for Latin stars are very high. So teams are very careful about sending players to winter ball. And so these leagues are not the same quality right now. They're still good leagues, but they're not the same quality, and some are struggling. And I don't think that will change. And probably that's something that is also sad, because I relate baseball in Latin America as part of baseball in general and the globalization of baseball. But it seems like we are just a source of players. We are no longer also part of the business as a league. So, but that's how it is.
So, since you ended on that point, let's talk about the financial health of these leagues. And do you think that Major League Baseball owes something financially to these leagues in these countries, again, that they've treated basically as baseball colonies? Do you feel that Major League Baseball has a responsibility to help these leagues financially when they struggle?
Well, I think baseball in Latin America is help baseball in the big leagues and help MLB teams in general, because they develop talent, they help these players to get experience under pressure, on a different pressure. But the thing, Morgan, is that, again, like when I saw baseball, there were a few Latin Americans in the big leagues. There were no big signing bonus. There were no big salaries. Right now, everything is a business. And if you ask Manfred, he will say, we have to protect our investment. And unfortunately, like I saw Brian Kingman. Brian Kingman was when he played for Tiburones, and one year he lost 20 games for the Oakland A's. That same year, he went and played and pitched for Tiburones. Like, nowadays it's impossible, like for the Tommy John fear or injuries, even safety issues. So I don't think MLB has an agreement with the Winter League. It's called the Winter League Agreement. But basically the agreement is used to forbid players, not only American players, but also like Venezuelan players cannot go and play in Venezuela, because they set a restriction based on the games they play in the minor leagues, and if you reach that point, then you cannot play winter ball. And so right now, like even the Venezuelan talent is not allowed to play in these leagues.
Right, and again, as these leagues struggle, because last time I was here, I kind of made the parallel between Cuban major leaguers and Negro League players who crossed over into the majors in the late 40s and early 50s, who had overcome this political barrier, entered the major leagues and brought this new style of play that people weren't quite ready for, as well as changing the cultural dynamic. But when I look at this, the other Negro League parallel is that late 40s, early 50s, these American League and National League teams were able to just go to Negro League teams and just sign their best players. There was no posting fee. It's not like signing Dice K. I didn't have to pay the Kansas City Monarchs, $150,000 to talk to Jackie Robinson, right? So, given that, again, major league teams can basically sign Latin American guys in ways that they in ways that they can't sign guys in Japan. What can these leagues do to keep major league teams from signing all the best talent out of Venezuela, La República Dominicana, etc., but at the same time protecting the team's interests financially?
No, they can do nothing. They can do nothing because they depend on these MLB teams. They depend because they need to work with them. Like they need to get the foreign players, and they also need the permission from the rest of the Venezuelan players who don't reach the point where they cannot play in Venezuela. So for the owners, they are trying to be friends of MLB teams. Institutionally, that relation doesn't work like that. It works more like it's a business. We're making a big investment in these players, and we're not gonna risk that. So these leagues have to learn how to survive under the new circumstances, and there is no other way around. There's no other, like MLB loves the word globalization of baseball, right? But globalization of baseball for MLB is something that they can control. And that's why the World Baseball Classic is controlled by MLB and by the MLBPA. When they see Latin America is a source of players. But the real, like they are doing as a big effort is just to reach the European market and Japan and some of the Asian countries, because those are better markets. You know? So it's a weird concept of globalization, because it's not the same as soccer, for example. But that's what they want to do.
But as you pointed out, it hasn't always been this way. You go to Barquisimeto, there's all these Blue Jays fans. Talk to us a little bit more about this agreement that the Blue Jays had with Cardenales de Lara, how it developed and how it ultimately ended.
Well, Pat Gillick was the one mostly responsible for that. So when Gillick left the Blue Jays, that agreement almost ended. I think I remember John Green, Alex Gonzalez were the last Blue Jays players that I remember were part of that agreement. Stacey Fielder, Mark Wheaton, Mike Timlin, Pat Waters, all the players, all right? After that, even teams in Venezuela are trying to get away from those working agreements, because right now we hold the restrictions. You only get, if you have a working agreement, you only get to use some of the players of that organization. So if they don't have enough talent in the minor leagues, you get a little to choose. So what they prefer now is just to work with several organizations. And unfortunately, now they're not only working with that, but with independent leagues. That is okay, right? But in comparing that situation with what I saw, there are many independent league players right now playing winter ball, or players who are trying to recover from an injury or trying to get a second chance. So right now it's a completely different quality of game than the year before. But still, you have so many Venezuelan players in the big leagues and in the minor leagues. Half of the minor leagues are from Latin America, and almost 30% of the big leagues players are also from Latin America. So we have enough talent, but the majority of the talent cannot play because of the Winter League agreement, especially pitchers. For example, Dioner Navarro. Dioner will play for Tiburones.
Because you guys are mostly used to hearing it, Dioner Navarro.
No, Dioner will be the third catcher in Tiburones. Like Salvador Perez, who is a star, will be the first one. Hector Sanchez, who played for San Francisco, maybe will be the second, and Dioner will be the third. So you have Magallanes. 2 years ago had Pablo Sandoval in third. Yeah, Elvis Andrews in short, Altuve in second. Yeah. So it was all-star infielder.
And that Magallanes team also had Magallanes is in Valencia, which is El Rey, the king. King Felix's hometown. They also, that 2012 Magallanes team also had Gustavo Chacín, but I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, he played for Tiburones now. Yeah. Well, kind of.
So go ahead. You're mentioning.
No. And Magallanes was Hugo Chavez's team.
Well, let's talk about Magallanes, because it has history here, because that was Cito Gaston's team. His name's on a plaque outside the stadium.
Yeah.
Do you remember the story about Pablo Sandoval and the helicopter?
Yeah.
Can you tell these guys the story about Hugo Chavez, Pablo Sandoval?
No, you tell the story.
No, you tell the story.
You tell it.
You know it better than I do.
No, yeah, probably you know better.
So tell me if I'm telling it wrong. So basically, Hugo Chavez, the late president of Venezuela, big baseball fan. Big fan of Magallanes, which is in Valencia, right? Cito Gaston's old team. And they were the team that had Pablo Sandoval's rights, to play in the Venezuelan league. So Pablo Sandoval, I guess it's the 2010 offseason. He's going to spend this offseason back in California, getting in shape. Okay, he's not going to play winter ball. But Magallanes qualifies for the playoffs, right? And were they playing Leones de Caracas? So they're playing Leones de Caracas, okay, which is like, this is in Venezuela, this is like Yankees, Red Sox, right? Like, you have to go see the Clásico between Magallanes y Leones. Pablo Sandoval is back in California working out. And Hugo Chavez is he's invested in this. Was it a one-game playoff?
Almost.
So it's basically one game that almost all the marbles, right? So Hugo Chavez says, look, Pablo Sandoval's on our roster, or not our, because he doesn't run the team, he just runs the country, and this is his favorite team. So magically, some private jet materializes in San Francisco to fly Sandoval back to Venezuela overnight. And then from Caracas, he gets in this helicopter, flies to the ballpark, gets off the helicopter right outside the ballpark in time for the game, gets into the game. Chavez is happy. He's like, man, I got the Kung Fu Panda. We're about to do this thing. And Sandoval, goes over 3? Goes over 3, I think, and Magallanes loses.
And Chavez couldn't go to a game. It will be boo.
Talk to the people.
Absolutely. No.
Because when you talk about Venezuela, there's no getting around politics, right? It's like you can't talk about Cuba without talking about the Castro. So talk about the shadow of Chavez on Magallanes and on that league.
Well, in Venezuela, we talk about baseball and about politics, right? Like that's what we do, and that's why we are not going to be a developed country, never. But right now, especially, and it's always been that way. Like political leaders cannot go to baseball games. They will be boo, absolutely. But Chavez was even worse because he was a very controversial figure, right? Like people love him or hate him. So and baseball fans, baseball is it's a popular game, but people who go to the games also are middle class because it costs money, right, to go. And normally middle class were not in favor of Chavez. So, but he talked all the time about Magallanes and about baseball, and because that's what we do, right?
Well, one thing I remember about Magallanes is that they had shawarma at the ballpark. Man, you can't get shawarma at the Rogers Center. In Canada, we pride ourselves on diversity. I go to Venezuela and get shawarma at the ballpark. Except they spelled it with a T-H, chuarma, but they had it.
And the intensity, and that's it. Like, when I see people talking about the right or the wrong way to play baseball, and the wrong way will be these Latin players like really excited and emotional, and they call them selfish and all these things.
Respect the game.
Yeah, Arturo. And that's the game that I saw when I was growing up. Like you were obligated to show emotions, but not only in baseball. That's part of the culture. So if you were not showing emotions, you didn't care, right? And these players grew up with that. And some of these players, the only way to get a contract and to escape poverty was really appreciating the game and playing it with all the passion that they can have. But then they have to learn a new game, a more controlled game or cerebral game or whatever you want to call it. And sometimes, of course, the players will go overboard. And so But the reality is that in Latin America you play a different type of game, and fans follow the game in a different way. And it's not the wrong way. It's just it's just the way it is in Latin America. So it's unfortunately that is seen sometimes as something that is wrong with baseball. No?
We got time for a couple questions?
Okay, yeah, guys, we're going to open it up for a couple questions. You in the front seat right here, sir.
I'm just curious how the introduction of a global or a world draft, how you think that would affect these Caribbean leagues?
Not the Caribbean leagues. It will affect the way probably players are signed in Latin America. And that's like a topic that we can talk about like for hours, because there's a lot of corruption, and there is these buscones who are the trainers of these players who get 40, 50, 60% of the signing bonuses. And we have the Sandy Alderson went to Venezuela and to the Dominican Republic and wrote a report about the situation of baseball in Latin America. So it's complicated. I don't think it will. The fear is that will reduce the number of Latin players signed, and that's what the Latin big leaguers think it could happen, because they relate that to what happened in Puerto Rico when Puerto Rico was incorporated into the draft. However, I don't think that's going to be the situation, but it will take forever really to explain the worldwide draft. Maybe in the future we can talk about it.
Next question. Let's take one over here. You, sir, in the hat. Nice and loud, please.
Okay. What's the relationship of retired Latin American major league players and the Caribbean leagues? Do a lot of players that have found success in the major leagues, do they feel an obligation, or do they have an investment in the health of the Caribbean leagues? Do they value it as a part of their cultural heritage as retired baseball players? And are the leagues able to take advantage of that in terms of promotion or even ownership and those kinds of things? Or is there, what's that like?
Well, depends. Like some players do. Some players believe that winter ball was very important for their career, so they, even after they retire in Major League, they go back, and some are coaches or managers, some even play. Vizquel went there like 2 years ago to retire in Venezuela before he retired with the Blue Jays. There are many cases of that. There are others that just don't care. Like they made enough money in the big leagues that they just ignore what's that.
Okay, our next question is going to come from back here. Just nice and loud. If you could stand up, then way people could hear you.
How much influence does gambling have over the Venezuelan Winter League, and what happens in the games?
Not a lot. Well, I don't know really. Like, I remember when I was a kid, I went to baseball game and I saw people gambling like for everything in the stadium. Like the next, it's gonna be a hit, and then they will bet something is gonna be a hit or not. But like formal gambling, like I left Venezuela in 1996, so a lot of things have changed in that moment. So I don't know if right now like gambling is a major problem. It seems like it's a problem in the Dominican Republic, but I cannot really tell you.
Okay, this is going to be our last question, guys. We have time for one more clip? Great. What's your name? And here's a microphone.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for the microphone. You mentioned that the trainers got a lot of the signing bonus. And while that sounds exploitive, it also sounds like it's above board in a way that maybe you can rationalize. I wonder if you could comment on some of the smuggling, like human smuggling cases, like with Yasiel Puig that he's going through right now. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah. Well, the first job I got was an agent that called me when I was at Indiana University because he needed somebody to help him translate some players, because he had some players in Costa Rica. So he hired me, we went to Costa Rica, and they were Cuban players. And I'm talking about 96. And Like, well, I did the translation and stuff, and then I realized that they were in the business of smuggling players out of Cuba in '96, and the guy who was heading that ended up in jail. Once I realized what they were doing, I stopped working for them, right? But what just right now it's even worse because like in that moment, we had El Duque and they were like a couple, but they never signed for a lot of money. But right now we're talking about $70 million, $60 million per contract. So it's a big incentive for these people just to go and trying to organize something to get these players out of Cuba. And it's a big problem. And with the situation with Yasiel Puig is not just him. There are many players who went through the same thing. And MLB is aware of that. But like in that specific case, MLB is not involved in smuggling these players out of Cuba, all right? The agents are involved, or people who call themselves agents, and they get also probably more than the 50% of the signing bonus, and in addition to other things. And so it's a big problem for MLB. At the same time, I don't know how they will deal with that because they love the talent, and these leagues are better with these players, so they cannot, like one of the possible ways to stop that will be just, okay, like player, now you have a budget to sign international players, but that budget would not affect Cuban players. So they're free agents and they're free if they are older of 23 years old to sign for any amount of money. So they will reduce the incentive if they put all Cuban players into the international budget, but they don't want to do that because I think they really like the idea of having all these talented Cuban stars in the big league. So, but for me, it's one of the biggest problems.
Well, Arturo, how much this sounds to me like, the NFL in steroids, Major League Baseball in steroids, the NFL and Ray Rice. How much does Major League Baseball really want to know about who's making these Cuban players magically appear outside of Cuba?
No, they don't want to know. They don't want to know. As easy as that, because the only thing that and again, they are not in the business of taking these players out of Cuba, but they could do things in the collective bargaining agreement to reduce the incentive. But why will they do that, right? Like,
well, it's funny, too, how these things always seem to come back to reflect on the player, right? Because you show me a high-profile Cuban, whether he's a baseball player or a boxer that comes to North America and makes a lot of money. I'll show you a guy that's been sued or who has somehow been implicated with a gangster, whether it's Cespedes, whether it's Puig, whether it's the boxer, Guillermo Rigondeaux. And somehow, again, these are portrayed in the media as character failings, of the athlete. Right? But like, if you're a multi-million-dollar athlete, to me, all it shows me is that you have to deal with some incredibly shady people to get out of Cuba. So why is this reflecting poorly on Puig or Cespedes? Because again, you don't mind that he's here making your team win, but we're going to judge him for having dealt with shady people. Well, if he hadn't dealt with these shady people, he'd still be back in Cienfuegos.
Well, it's the same thing with like when you have these Latin players and people make fun of them because this is not Fausto Carmona, is whatever, I don't know, what is the name of the real name. And they make fun of them forever, right? But they don't realize that this guy had to change his name when he was 18 because nobody will see him playing baseball because by 18 he was too old. And also they don't blame the team or the agent or the Buscon, who were the ones who facilitated all those lies, but blame this kid who was 18 or 17 or 19 and wanted to escape poverty. So, but we make fun of them. So that's fine. Like, and I get to understand that. And sometimes what we see from media about Latin America is just the North American version of what happens, but doesn't really matter.
Okay, guys, everyone, let's give a big round of applause.